Our theme this month, as those of you who've been coming know, is Love in Action. And today I want to talk about bridging the gap. We've been talking about that wonderful quality of God called love all month. And reminding ourselves that love is God's way or desire to express itself through all it creates. We've talked about love's way, meaning the love within us that brings forth our own true and lasting beauty. The love within us that enables us to see and to feel that love around us. And we've talked about unconditional love, patience, forgiveness. Last week, I used my dog Corky as some examples of those expressions of love. Well, I have a confession to make. And if you're a recovering Catholic, please don't have a flashback on this. There are no confessionals here. But my confession is that I've been setting you up. All month I've been talking about the life within us, the life that flows through us as an expression or attribute of God, passed on. And that's all true. That's authentic. And so are you. My intention through this entire month has been to establish the fact that within and through each heart and mind, that fact within and through each heart and mind, in order that we could take this time today to talk about, so what? It's within me, it flows through me, so what? Anybody remember Peggy Lee besides me? Peggy Lee. Peggy Lee used to sing the song, "Is That All There Is?" And that phrase certainly applies to what I want to talk about today, because as important, as critical to life as self-love is, it's a step along the way. It's a step along the bridge that spans the gap between you and me, between you and your neighbor, between you and people who live in other states. You know, the ones who talk with the funny accents. Self-love is a step along the bridge that spans the gap between you and people of other religions, between you and people of different color or dress or facial characteristics. In fact, as we learn to love ourselves, we step into that gap, which is the realization that, well, everybody's different than I am. It's the realization that, first of all, each of us is unique. And then it's the realization there must be a reason for that. Next comes the realization, then it must be okay. Maybe God knows what it's doing after all. Have you ever stopped to think that prejudice, judgment, bias on our part is a consciousness that isn't quite sure it trusts what Spirit is doing? Or maybe it's a consciousness that fears that what God is doing is beyond our capability to understand, to keep up, to accept. In our Science of Mind 101 class, which we just finished, we've been learning about where such ideas as that come from and how they come about. And in this next class, 102, we'll be studying the nature of effective prayer. Out of both of these classes and the textbook we're using comes the same message. It's erroneous to believe that humankind began with a complete conscious revelation and relationship with God and with all of God's creation. And then in the ages that followed, through weakness and sin, lost sight of that splendid vision. That's not only erroneous thinking, that's just plain bunk. Remember the talk I did about BS? Anybody remember that? Anybody remember what BS is?
Belief system.
Belief system. That's just a belief system. There's a very metaphysical word for you, bunk. Perhaps false would be more proper. But whether you call it erroneous, false, or just plain bunk, its meaning is clear. It's not true. Yet, most religions today teach that very thing. And they teach it, many of them, in good faith. No pun intended there. Most religions teach from writings or practices which were established centuries ago. And though those ideas had word pictures or examples that related to the thinking of the time, they are woefully out of date and out of sync with today's world. So many of you have said to me what I said to myself years ago. I just am not getting the guidance, the belief, the encouragement out of my former religion that lifted me. I just had to search for something else. I knew there was something else. We all know there's something more, there's something better, there's something else. And that's why we walk away from things that no longer nurture us and guide us in the most loving and prosperous and healthful way. The cultures of the world have evolved. Why shouldn't our consciousness evolve as well? And I believe that much of what's happening in today's world, related to the mistrust, the disagreement, the hate that one culture has for another, has to do with these outmoded religious beliefs, even more than it does with the political, the technological, or the financial differences. Sure, we have more modern ways to destroy each other now than we did 5,000, 2,000, or even 200 years ago. Some people even have more money and the things money can buy to surround themselves with. Why then do most of the world's citizens still cling to these old, limited religious ideas that separate or try to eliminate those who call God by a different name? In fact, Eric Butterworth, writing in The Universe is Calling, says, there have been so many powerful realizations of the presence of God in the writings of poets, saints, mystics, down through the ages, that one wonders how we could have failed to grasp it. He continues by saying, God is not in us in the same sense that a raisin is in a bun. God is in us as the ocean is in a wave. The wave is nothing more nor less than the ocean expressing as a wave. God is an allness in which you exist as an eachness. Isn't that an incredible line? God is an allness in which each one of us exists as an eachness. Yet humankind continues to myopically look past all the ways in which we are alike to the insignificant and cursory ways that we differ. I heard a wonderful description of this on TV one day on a sitcom which occasionally delivers some epiphanies. a young black man about to graduate from college said that he had learned a lot about being different from his grandmother. He said when he was a small child, his grandma handed him a box of Crayolas. You still remember what Crayolas were? They're still around, incidentally. And she explained to him, as she dumped them out on the table in front of him, being a different color is like being a Crayola. Each one brings its own beauty and presence to the whole picture. And they're all made by the same manufacturer. Isn't that incredible? Whatever our heritage, our color, our creed, we're the products of a collective consciousness. What Ernest Holmes called the thinking of the world. In his day, he described that collective consciousness as being in ourselves. And by that, he meant that it is embodied in our being. However, like the small child with the box of Crayolas, we eventually realize that the picture cannot be completed with only one crayon. Even individually, we are not alone in this world. And neither is our family, our city, our state, our country, our ethnicity, our religion. Get the picture? It's all part of the picture. So many of you have heard me talk about my own metamorphosis from a hawk to a dove in my life. You've heard me describe my belief that in early life, I thought I was a coward because I had no stomach for violence, for meanness, for discord. I don't know that I've ever shared with you where that belief came from. Well, obviously, it came, at least in part, from the collective consciousness in which I was immersed at that time. I was 5 years old when the United States declared war in World War II. My father, having served in World War I, worked for Douglas Aircraft, building aircraft bombers. My brother-in-law was in the Navy. In fact, he was in Pearl Harbor the day it was bombed. The consciousness of the war was around me. And no doubt, maybe some of you as well in your formative years. Out of those experiences, we have memories. Some conscious and some below consciousness. Or at least below the conscious level of our thought. But those work on us and in us until we change that. For me, it began thinking I was a coward because the thought of killing each other didn't appeal to me. Later, I came to the realization it also didn't change the world for the better because it keeps happening. Eventually, I realized it'll never change until I change. Eventually, I realized what that world around me had defined as a coward was actually my recognition that there had to be a better way. And my choice was for a better way. Rather than condemning myself then for cowardice, I realized that it was time to become a voice for something loving for humanity. I guess that's probably why I'm here this morning. Eventually, I realized that we cannot continue to escape the power of the fact that every act of every human against another human is the act of an insecure creature. Anger, prejudice, piousness, bigotry, rejection, oppression, those are acts of fear. And fear is the absence of what? Love. So, if it's erroneous to believe that humankind began with a complete consciousness and relationship with God and with all of God's creations, and then in the ages that followed through weakness and sin, lost sight of that splendid vision, then what is true? What is true is that the splendid vision still exists. What is true is that love, divine, penetrating, opening, life-giving love, is the very essence of God. And since we are one with God, our very essence as well. You begin to pick up on the thread, don't you? Episcopalian Bishop John Spong says, "The God who is love cannot be approached in worship except through the experience of living out that unconditional quality of love." Let me say that again. The God who is love cannot be approached in worship, that's an Episcopalian word, incidentally, through the experience of living out that unconditional love. That's the only way. Religions need to be broken open and freed of their non-inclusive prejudices. All churches, all religions, everywhere must make this their highest quality. And biblical scholars would tell you that's why there is an Old Testament and a New Testament. What's the New Testament about? It's about love, isn't it? And now what we're talking about is practicing that. Practicing those words of love individually to the next individual we come in contact with. So I believe, as Spong does, that the essence of the human experience is to be courageously oneself. Courageously be yourself. Claim the ability to define yourself and to live your life in freedom. And if I believe that for myself, I have to believe it for all humankind. We must find a way to do that without killing each other. When I lived in San Diego, I was immensely touched by the scenes of young men and women leaving their families to go halfway around the world to defend and protect those of us who remain at home. I was also immensely touched by the fact that members of the community, even those who opposed sending them into battle, supported them and honored them for their beliefs and courage. And now I have that same situation in my own family, as many of you know. My oldest grandson, Daniel, is a career Army officer. And though I abhor what his employer does, I support him and his family for their beliefs and finding a way to protect the rest of us. That's hard when you make it hard. That's easy when you see past just the beginning of it to the outcome of it. I'm in full support of our country's and the world's leaders who want to stop those who seek to deny freedom to any human, to stop those who harm any being. Because everyone's freedom to live his or her own life doesn't include their right to harm anyone else in the process. How often we talk about that, at no one else's expense. So that's the message through love that we must send. That each of us is free to do, be, and have whatever we choose at no one else's expense. So there's not an easy answer to this, is there? At least not one that has been applied yet in history as we know it. We as we're here now, must continue to raise our individual consciousness of peace and love until its impact on the collective consciousness results in freedom for all humans without harm to any. It's a tough task to take all 7 billion of them on today before noon. Try your neighbor. Try the relative that really bites you. Try the one person in the news today that rankles you the most. Try one at a time. As Spong says so eloquently, all human beings are created in Spirit's image and reflect God's holiness. All human beings. And God loves all it has made. Work on that one. Sit with that one. Pray about that. God loves every person that prejudice would reject. There's nothing any one of us can do or be that places any other person outside the boundaries of God's love. Which is another way of saying you can't wish them hell, the devil, or any other brutal end. If we continue to hate one that God loves, we place ourselves in the position of claiming for ourselves a moral righteousness that is beyond the righteousness we attribute to Divine Spirit. So we must confront rather than deny these facts, and we must affirm the truth. Each of us is created, loved, and invited by the source of life into heightened consciousness and into the fullness of love. The more significantly human we are, the more we reveal our divinity. And as we neutralize any force which seeks to dehumanize, to diminish, or distort life, we invite the people of the world into revealing that consciousness and that fullness as well. Which is another way of saying when you can relieve the fear, what's left? Love. Whether that's starting with you or ending with someone else, it's the same formula. It's one of those spiritual laws that never fails. So if we are to succeed, it must be by and through love. Listen to the words of the Dalai Lama. Deep down, we must develop a real affection for each other, a clear realization and recognition of our shared human status. At the same time, we must openly accept all ideologies and systems as a way of solving humanity's problems. One country, one nation, one ideology, one system is not sufficient. Here's what I hear in those words. I hear the act of bridging the gap. What I hear is that everyone is different than I am. What I hear is that we are each unique. What I hear is that there's a reason for that. And what I hear is that that's okay. What I hear is that when love is present, fear dissolves. The attribute of God that we call love is unconditional and unchanging. It doesn't fluctuate or vacillate because it's a state of being, which means it's unaffected by external factors or actions. It relates to the world with support, with nurturing, with patience, with forgiveness. It emanates from the heart, which does not judge, and its only desire is whole and complete happiness. When we bridge the gap, We accept that we can demonstrate unconditional love in our conscious lives as well. Author Leo Buscaglia offers more thoughts on this. Here's a quote from him that I really like. The majority of us lead quiet, unheralded lives as we pass through this world. There most likely will be no ticker tape parades for most of us, no monuments created in our honor. But that does not lessen the possible impact, for there are scores of people waiting for someone just like us to come along. People who will appreciate our compassion, appreciate our encouragement, and who will need our unique talents. Someone will live a happier life merely because we took the time to share what we had to give. Too often we underestimate the power of a touch, a smile, a kind word, a listening ear, an honest compliment, or the smallest act of caring. Any of these acts has the potential to turn a life around. Just consider the continuous opportunities that there are to make our love felt. Thought-provoking words from Leo Buscaglia. So be willing to let yourself experience a deep and penetrating sense of love. Be willing to take a sincere and direct approach to whatever it is you call your source of being. There is an endless array of names you can attach to it, including, don't forget, Louise, Wayne Dyer's choice. Because he doesn't care what you call it. It's a compilation of all of us and more. But it is that creative energy that is ceaseless. So be willing to be flexible, to be kind, to be patient, to be compassionate. That's what love in action is. Bridging that gap between knowing you are God's creation, which makes you worth loving, and knowing that all humankind is God's creation, which makes them worth loving too. When we come to trust in this wisdom, we have come to trust in the wisdom that created us. And so it is.